How do you pay yourself as a developer? After all, when you are developing property, ground up property development, what happens is that you find the land, you then negotiate the deal, you take it through planning, you plan your build, and then you physically build it out. And then at the end of that process, you're either going to rent it out or you're going to sell it. And it's only at that point that the profit is released. Now that time frame, particularly for your first development, could be anything up to 2 years. So how do you survive through that period and how do you get paid? So that's the subject of this video and clearly the subject of my book, You a Property Developer. So if you're interested in becoming a property developer or not quite sure whether this is for you, get a hold of my book. It will really outline what's involved in property development and give you an opportunity to assess whether this is for you. And currently I'm offering it for just the price of postage and packaging. So essentially the book, which normally is priced at £10, is free to you. So how do you get paid? Well, the first thing to kind of understand is that it depends on where you are coming into the equation into property development from. So what is it you currently do? If you're a contractor of any type, joiner, plumber, electrician, ground worker, then clearly you could bill yourself for the time that you spend on that construction project. And that's obviously during the construction phase. However, what about getting paid prior to that, or if you don't have those particular skills? Well, the reality is that when you start any business, you're likely to start it on a part-time basis, and therefore you will have a source of income. But at some point, you need to be able to transition into that business on a full-time basis. And with property development, since we've already established that the profit comes at the end, how do you end up paying yourself, particularly if you don't have a particular skill that is related to the actual construction of the property? So in the land finding process, you can pretty much do that part-time. If you can devote 10 hours a week to the process, then you will be able to find off-market land. The second part is then taking it through planning. That's not particularly onerous process because you're actually engaging other professionals to help you do that. And the whole planning process of planning your build and lining up your contractors, lining up your funding and getting ready to build, again, can be done on a part-time basis. However, when you start the build itself, you can, of course, do that on a part-time basis, but you may want to do it on a full-time basis. So there comes the conundrum. How do you actually get paid during that period of time? Well, the first thing is to understand is that you're not self-employed, you are an employee of the business. And so often people, when they actually set up a business, they tend to think of their own income. They don't tend to think of that as an expense to the business. So the reality is that what they'll do is they'll say, all right, here's the sales coming in, here's our cost of those sales, in other words, what it costs us to produce those sales, here's the expenses of the business, and I'll take what's left. That's no way to run a business. You, as an employee of the business, should be paid. After all, you wouldn't expect to employ somebody and say, you know what, you'll get paid at the end if there's any money left. That is really just a very bad way to actually organize a business. Right from the get-go, you've got to think about you getting paid. Now, you may decide that you're not going to pay yourself an absolute fortune, but you're going to pay yourself enough to cover your basic living expenditures. Because if you don't do that, then your worry is always going to be on making ends meet. So you've got to know that an income is going to be coming in. And so the way that you do it is that when you actually create your budget for the build is that you need to build your income into that. Now, that can be as a project manager, because that's essentially what you're going to be doing. You're going to be managing the project, and so therefore you should be paid. After all, if you were to bring in somebody else to be a project manager and the project does need managed, then you'd be paying them. So as the project manager yourself, then you are going to be able to essentially be paid. The other point about being a project manager is it's where you're going to learn the most about the process. Eventually, as the business grows, you will bring in a project manager. You'll perhaps be bring them in on a project by project basis, or you may employ somebody full-time as a project manager in your business. Because ultimately, you're looking to actually take yourself out of the business so that the business becomes an entity in itself and runs without you. Not that you necessarily want to not have a a part of the business, but so is that you actually have a business that's not dependent on you, because ultimately that's a dangerous position to be in, where the business is you, and if something happens to you, you fall ill, feel sick, then the business comes to a grinding halt. So the ultimate objective obviously will be to have people carry out the functions that you're going to carry out in the early part of the business's life cycle. So again, just to reiterate, so if you look at your potential income statement, you're going to have no income coming in until the property is sold. However, you're going to have your expenses, and part of that should be your salary. And that is built in. Now, this brings us then to a second point, is that very often people think, okay, I am self-employed, so therefore can I borrow any money? Yes, you can, because actually within development, the lender is not looking at what you earn as a person on a personal basis. In other words, they're not looking at you like they would for a traditional mortgage, where you can earn a multiple of your income. They're looking at the project. And that's why it's so fundamentally important that the project stacks up. So what they'll be looking in that project is that you can achieve a profit, gross profit of 25% of gross development value. So in other words, if you're doing a development that say is 1.6 million, that then needs to produce a profit of 400,000. The rest of that money, the 1.2 million, is the expenditure of actually completing that build. That will include the land, and that's why it's fundamentally important that you find off-market land in order to make sure that the thing stacks up. And then it will include all the expenditures, the actual physical expenditures, or your contractors, your materials, and your salary. And that is quite legitimate to build that into the program, and most lenders will accept that as being a reality, because they realize that the project needs to be managed and that you can't do that effectively if you're not going to be there, and therefore that you need to be paid to be there. So the ability to be able to pay yourself within a development is a real possibility, and that's why you need to treat property development as a business and not think of it as a self-employed proposition, as so many people do. Remember, pay yourself so as that the business can operate effectively. So again, if you would like a copy of my book, You a Property Developer, go to the website youapropertydeveloper.com. Remember to subscribe to the channel, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.